Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Macavity Award-winning Lev Rosen about The Bell in the Fog. Hello, Lev.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Congratulations on your award.
Thank you. That was a fun day.
I know it was, and you've also been nominated for several others. I know you were up for an Anthony. Is that correct?
Yeah. Wanda won that one. Well deserved. But Lavender House was up for the Lambda, the Anthony for historical, and the Macavity for historical. So that was really exciting.
I think that's wonderful. Congratulations, and well deserved.
Thank you.
I loved this book. I'm a big mystery fan, and I love historical mysteries, and this fits in that. But I also find that this book it's so today as well as it was back then. So I'm going to ask you, I love the name Evander. Is that something, did you choose that for a reason, or was that just a character name you came up with?
When I was writing Lavender House, one of the things I was thinking about was like, what's a name for a detective? What's a good name for a detective? A historical detective. And the sort of formula I came up with by looking at other names is like a sort of elaborate first name and a very like common, solid last name. And so, I went with a slightly sort of symbolic surname in terms with Mills. He's been through the mill. That's how I kept thinking of it.
I like it.
And then Evander, I was just looking at names that would have been not like top 100 popular, but top 200 popular the year he was born. And I saw Evander and I was like, oh yeah, that works real well with Mills, Evander Mills. And it's like the right sort of, elaborate over the top. But then everyone just calls him Andy.
Well, which is funny. I play with a lot of names and stuff, and I think so often a name that has two syllables followed by one syllable or the reverse always flows so easily. So I'm like, I like that. So it's just my little head tricks I play.
There's a reason I use both my middle initials in when I publish my adult books, and that's because it has better rhythm.
Well, we have these sing-song voices. That's what I look for in writers. I want to hear a voice telling the story. And I do think that those things that make us more acceptable or warm and friendly or whatever that is a wonderful thing. I do love Andy. He is just somebody you want to cheer for and hold at the same time. How much fun do you have with Andy?
Andy's great. I mean, Andy, he is sort of like, hashtag sad boy, but I love writing him because there's both a sort of wisdom in terms of, he is familiar with hiding, and so he's good at spotting people who hide. But he also is extremely aware of how culpable he is, as his time from his time as a police detective in 1952 San Francisco. And he would be, he had this system where he was aware of what clubs the cops would raid next, and he would not go there that night, but he never warned anyone. And so he was part of this system that oppressed essentially the rest of the community. And it's only in Lavender House as he sort of, after he's caught, the time his system screws up, after he's caught and he contemplates suicide, and then he's given this case, and Lavender House, over the course of Lavender House, he sort of realizes what it could be to have a queer life, because before that he was a cop, and then sometimes he went to the gay bars and had anonymous sex. And now, like, the idea of an actual community and a family. Those were new ideas to him. And upon seeing them, he realized how culpable he was for harming his own community, this community that welcomes him. So especially, starting off at the Belle of the Fog, he feels he has a lot to make up for, and he does. And that culpability and that awareness of culpability, combined with the fact that he really did go in with the best intentions. He really did want to help people as well as hide. That makes for an interesting character, someone who wants to help, but also has done so much harm.
That's one of the things that I got in reading The Belle in the Fog is the fact that we see Andy's growth in it, and it's a healthy growth. And it's, I was thinking about a lot of detectives in some books are downtrodden. They're at they're an alcoholic, or they've come out of an abusive relationship or whatever. And those are wonderful. They have their place. But one of the things about Andy is he's had a tough go of it, having been in the Navy and then being a police officer. And he's been outed seemingly a lot in his life. And as you say, he hides. But to see his progression from the beginning of the book to the end of the book is very gratifying, because as a reader and as a history lover, we see that he is making a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that he when he's given the opportunity to finally help people and he takes it, that is this moment of such empowerment for him. We can all be empowered by helping our community.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And a lovely thing that you've also done is you brought some characters back from Lavender House, but you've also given us a different cast of characters in the Belle. And he is in a community that at the beginning of the book, I don't think he sees how very much in the community he is. And his eyes get to open during the book. And that was very impressive. Do you plot a lot?
When I am plotting, sometimes I have to submit an outline, as opposed to just writing freely. But I use the same mentality when I'm writing the outline as I do when I'm just writing a book from scratch, which is, I don't plot too heavily until about halfway through. Until then, it's like very much sort of following my whims and being like, okay, well, I set something up. I knew I wanted to sort of use that noir trope of the detective walks into his office and there's his ex. And so I set that up and I was like, all right, well, what's it going to be? And, from there, I just sort of let it happen. And about halfway through, that's when I'm like, oh, okay. I sort of have to figure out what's going on here. And that's when I plot the rest of the mystery out. And then I go back and I make the first half fit, so I let myself, have just vibes for a little while until I feel solid in what I've created. And then the characters, especially, I think once the characters feel alive in my mind, that's when I can focus on plot more.
When you're writing, does a voice come to you? And I don't necessarily mean, the multiple voices, but I mean, do you ever create a character that it so speaks to you that you simply write what you hear?
I mean, I think all my characters to a certain extent are that. Sometimes as I write, like there'll be like an off note almost. It's like playing piano. Not that I'm very good at that, but your fingers are going to where they're supposed to, and then they hit the wrong thing. And that's the moment, you can delete and be like, and you have to think about it and be like, what is the right note here? What is the right sentence? What is the right voice? But generally the voice comes as I write, especially since it's first person, it's sort of unavoidable. And then I think it becomes stronger in the edit. So much of writing is in the edit, but the voice Andy's voice is pretty solid and with me now.
He is with me as well. I just, once again, I really want to say that his progression was just so much fun for me, because you see him blossoming. And then, of course, I'm curious at how many of these may return again. So we'll get to that in a little while. I did see you on a panel at BoucherCon, and there was something that you mentioned there that I didn't know, and I was very impressed with it. And that's the California Supreme Court ruling in, was it 1951, about gay bars?
Yeah. So essentially, what happened in 51, 52 was the Black Cat, which was a gay bar, was constantly raided and shut down and had its liquor license taken away. And the reason that could happen is because it was illegal to serve alcohol in a place where queer people congregated, because a place where queer people congregated was considered sort of a house of ill repute in the same way a brothel would be. And so they were constantly raided and liquor license taken away, reapply for liquor license by essentially being like, it wasn't intentional, officer. They just happened to be there. And it's interesting. You look at the cases from the time, and there's so much of this idea that like bartenders are supposed to be able to recognize homosexuals so they cannot serve them. And that was all over the country too. It was just like,
Yes.
All this like sort of case law about like, well, you can tell, really, really like wacky stuff. Anyway, so they kept getting raided, and the owner of the bar, who was a straight man, sued the state of California and essentially said, you can't keep taking the liquor license away because it should not be illegal to serve alcohol to a particular set of people. And the state of California Supreme Court said, you're right, with caveats. They said, the ruling was very specific and like laid out details in that it was essentially, it is not illegal to serve alcohol to gay people. However, a place where indecent acts are happening, and this would mean two people of the same sex dancing, kissing, holding hands, anything remotely, queer, essentially, would still be illegal, and you could still definitely take away a liquor license then, shut the place down. So for a few years, essentially like 52 to 55, and then the laws changed again, gay bars were technically legal in the state of California, which is wild, and it opened up a lot of interesting opportunities, but the police were still constantly raiding them. They were looking for they were like so angry about this. They were looking for new ways to shut these places down, while also making sure that they were like taking a lot of bribes from these places so as not to raid them as often. And there's stories of them planting drugs in these places. So it's an interesting time, the mid-50s in California, to be a gay bar, because on the one hand, more freedom than you've ever had. Like, yes, yeah, you can be a gay bar. That's wild. On the other hand, like with more freedom, as always, comes more persecution, more visibility, more persecution. So like you'd have drag acts advertised in the papers, and straight people would go watch the ferries. It was a whole thing. But at the same time, there would be constant raids, and you had a big target on your back.
Yeah, and I think the whole abuse of power is, we still see it today. We just see it maybe in slightly different ways. The trans community is so put down nowadays. And I was telling you before we recorded, a friend of mine was in a raid in Miami in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time for a couple of years where they were raiding gay bars again. And it's hard to imagine that some things keep repeating itself.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the research, doing all this research, and I get asked the question a lot of like, is it super depressing, especially watching it repeat now? And it's not. I know that's not the answer anyone ever expects, and like some people are disappointed on, but doing all the research into the terrible stuff that happened to us then and watching it unfold again in a slightly different form now is actually sort of, it brings me a sense of peace. And the reason is, when you do this research, you can't just find the bad stuff. You find the good stuff too, if you're doing it right. And the truth is, these, terrible times, we had thriving communities. People fell in love, people found each other, and the fact that we had those then, and it means that we have it then. The thing I always say is like writing a noir gay history piece makes perfect sense, because being gay in the 50s was a noir experience. The world's closing in around you, everyone's out to get you, very classically noir. But you would find light in the darkness in the form of community. And
Yes.
like all these stories I read, all this history I uncover, there's so much light in that darkness. There's so much joy in these communities. And seeing that in the past and seeing how they survived makes me very hopeful for what is happening now. So I know it doesn't make too much sense, but
Well, to me it makes sense, because one of the things is we have to celebrate where we've been to say that we can celebrate where we are today. And
mhm,
there were lots of brave people who came before us, and it wasn't just the 50s. There were lots of brave people in the 20s. You
yep,
know, because part of what happens in the Bell is there's the Navy going on. And
mhm,
in World War II, it was really quite easy to be gay as long as you were fighting for the country. They gave people shared rooms and shared bunks that they knew were gay because they wanted them to be happy so they could keep fighting. Of course,
mhm.
once a war is over, that becomes a very different conversation, because now we need to get rid of people because we have to downsize. So what they did with the lavender scare is, they downsized. They downsized in a very horrific way. But I think if we don't learn our history, then we definitely are destined to repeat it.
Yeah, and World War II is so interesting, and so much of it, I did so much research on that for this book too, and Andy's past in the Navy, because World War II in many ways formed a lot of these queer communities.
Mhm.
The draft funneled all those one gay guy in their town into a base, and suddenly there were 30 of them, and they find each other, and they have this community. And even towards the later half of the war, when the military did start cracking down on queer people and institutionalizing them, in those institutions they all found each other. They would like put on drag shows, they had like a great time. It was and it wasn't all great. They got blue ticketed, which is never good, but they still created these relationships and friendships that lasted for years afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I met probably 10, 15 years ago, I met two gentlemen in Palm Springs that had come together in the war. And I think for them, it was the Korean War. And they bought a farm in Southern Oregon, and they had been together 50 some years. And it was the war that brought them together.
Hmm.
So good things do happen.
Yeah, and I think when you do research, it's hard not to see those, and those are
Yes.
what really gives me hope for what's happening now.
Well, and I did.
It's so easy to fall into the darkness,
It
but
is.
once you start seeing the good stuff, it is all around you.
I totally agree, and that's one of the great things about this book, is the fact that you've given us lots of characters that we can root for. There are lots of lies, there is lots of deception, there are some murders, but there's a community, and you give us a community that is so beautiful that I want to see more of it. So, will there be a third?
Yes, there'll be a third and a fourth.
Well, hello, I like
I,
it.
I know. I like it too. I turned in the rough draft of the third. I just got back an editorial letter.
Uh,
And so that'll be out next October. And then another one the year after that. And I'm hoping for more, but I don't we need to see how these first four do. So everyone just go out and buy, 200-300 copies,
that's
and then I'll definitely get those fifth, sixth, seventh books.
I totally agree. And just to sort of toot your horn a little bit, I believe this year you will have three new out. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have 3 books out this year. It's been a long year.
Well, and hopefully a lot of good exposure, Lev. I'm so excited for you. Again, the book is called The Bell and the Fog. Do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on social media at Lev AC Rosen, one word, no periods, no spaces, except on Facebook where it's just Lev Rosen. I'm mostly on Instagram, but my Instagram does post immediately on my Facebook. So those are the two places you can find me. And then website, levacrosen.com, and you can reach out to me there if you want.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. Hang on for me just a second.
Sure.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.